Please welcome Barbara Humpton, CEO of Siemens USA.
Audience, right? Is this not a fabulous spot? And by the way, I know a thing about New York audiences, which is you all are going to be standing around drinking cocktails and also talking to each other. But tonight, actually, you're not. Because tonight, you're going to learn something and you're going to remember for the rest of your lives. Thanks to Widehall, to Steve Clemens for putting together this fabulous program on AI for real. AI for real, that's a term that I really love because it actually says something about the way Siemens is thinking about technology. We've been hearing a lot about consumer AI, right? But Siemens is actually working on the industrial AI. You see, you might have actually also heard about physical AI. You'll hear Jensen Huang, our partner and the CEO of NVIDIA, talking about this. And he recognizes that there is a new kind of AI being introduced into the world. And he actually describes Siemens as the operating system of the real world. Think about that. When Siemens got involved in technology, the question was, where should we be applying our know-how? And we looked beyond IT and looked into buildings and factories, into the grid, into transportation. What we're looking at is how we can transform the real world with AI. Now, consumer AI, we know it runs on large swaths of publicly available and open data. Industrial AI is different. In industrial AI, we're using curated sets of data in very controlled environments. And Siemens has know-how from decades of work with machine learning and the application of what has now become AI to know how to turn that data into value for customers. This is one of those moments when we realize it changes everything. Being able to apply AI in an environment where people are working with machines gives us the chance to elevate the role of everyone. Now, let's think about what's happening then in the manufacturing sector. Because AI is going to do more than just change our economic productivity in so many ways. This is actually a moment when we can be focused on bringing manufacturing back to America. And I want to tell you how, because there are two pieces to this. But it starts with globalization. You know that for the last many decades, the word has been globalization on steroids. We made our manufacturing decisions based on where was the cheapest labor? How can we squeeze the next nickel out of our production? And in fact, it wasn't until COVID hit us that we realized that we needed a new equation. We needed resilience. We needed the ability to get items on time when we needed. Frankly, we needed to be able to get them at all. Those who had products to sell were those who won. So we know that this disruption has happened, and now along comes the technology that actually empowers the kind of change to make things more locally. The old trend of globalization is switching now to the new trend, and I like to call it glocalization. Think about this. Think about the AI that's now available to us. This is more than just the ability to use large language models. We now have the ability to apply general intelligence to other kinds of technology we have in the manufacturing environment. The tools we've been using, like digital twins or software-defined architecture. You've been watching the digital world change now, and you've seen that digital technologies change exponentially, but you've been accustomed to seeing manufacturing and the world of industry change incrementally. Now that AI is laying on top of our real world, we have the ability to bring this incremental sector of our market to exponential growth. So here we are at this fabulous moment, in this fabulous place, looking out at the world. And what we need is the people who are mobilizing capital to understand the opportunity ahead of us. It's going to take an ecosystem of players. We at Siemens want to bring our know-how to the table, our know-how in electrification, automation, digitalization, our know-how in applying these tools in ways that really matter. But guess what? In the world of manufacturing, 98% of all of the manufacturers are small and medium enterprises. How in the world are they going to cross this bridge and join our new economy? I'd like to believe that the people in this room will join with us. I see Anthony Casciano, who leads Siemens Financial Services. He's one of our global leaders, and he is right here in New Jersey and leading our US team. We can be working together to bring these new technologies to bear. Now, there are two challenges I want us to be aware of. The first challenge is literally the workforce. Where is this workforce going to come from? Well, I fear that we actually have, people have been saying that the robots are coming to take our jobs. I'm here to tell you tonight, nothing could be further from the truth. AI actually expands what's humanly possible. AI is the first technology that has come to us, and it's actually easier to learn because it speaks English or Chinese or Japanese or Italian. It's a translator. It makes it easy for people to approach. So we have the tools within our means to attract that workforce. And we have the tools in this room to go begin to convert the brownfield engineering sites, manufacturing sites of the United States. And where better than the United States of America to bring manufacturing back? This is AI for real, and I can't wait for you to hear more about it. Steve?
Great. Thank you very much, Barbara. Hey, Barbara.
Come sit right here. Yes,
so you all
Steve.
know Barbara Humpton. I'm Steve Clemens. I'm editor-at-large of National Interest, and this is sort of my talk show. You know, I'm not exactly Jimmy Fallon. I'm going to go down into the metro. I'm from D.C. anyway. I don't even understand the metro here. And like rap and do all this fake stuff. But I am pretty amazing what we asked ChatGPT to do to kind of create an environment with the backdrop of New York behind it. This is really all fake, folks. It's not real. There's nothing like this that's real. It is an extraordinary room, and it's great to be with all of you. We're going to have some conversations. You know, somewhere here, we're going to, hopefully get, some questions with some of you. Many of you I don't know, and so make your questions good, or you won't be invited back again. No, I'm just joking. I do want to say that, where's Naharika Acharya? Naharika here, she's the real guru with Taylor, Gurki, and other people behind the scenes. They have extra chairs hidden that any of you who want chairs can get. So if you want a chair, get one. But I would tell you that any of you who are standing are closer to the bar, closer to the whiskey bar, and closer to the food than anybody seated. So you make your own choice, okay? We're not going to try and direct that. But let me first say that we're going to have a conversation with a number of people, run this for the show. We'll have Barbara Humpton back in just a moment. But I want to invite my old friend, this is really, really cool, because I haven't seen him in like 30 years, Nathan Cheats, the global chief economist of Citi, to start this discussion. Nathan, have a seat here.
Wonderful to be here.
I'm going to put us into a historical category that many of you may not remember. I mean, we actually remember the Soviet Union. Most of you were like post-Soviet
I wasn't going to
babies.
admit that, Steve.
What's that? No, I do. And then
that.
he remembered that we were at the Federal Reserve in the 90s talking about Russia and what Russia was doing. And how life comes back again.
Yes.
We're sort of back in this moment. But it's a real pleasure. Nathan, of course, is sort of the Wizard of Oz for looking at the global economy and both looking at what's happening here in this country but around the world. But here today, we're talking about AI for real.
Yeah.
And I was talking to Alex Wang, who's the CEO of Scale AI, and he sort of talks about this. And when you listen to Barbara Humpton, in terms of looking at the possibilities, when you bring economists along, they think that AI may be the thing that saves the nation. Mm-hmm. So with 30-foot economic swells going on, particularly in Washington, I don't know if anything the administration is doing is affecting New York.
I'm feeling wet. I don't know. About
are you feeling wet? All the splashing.
Yeah.
Is AI going to save us?
You know what? First, let me say it's wonderful to be here and to see you again after all these years. Secondly, I'm thrilled to be talking about anything other than tariffs.
Okay.
And especially a topic where instead of being bearish, I can be bullish. I'm dispositionally an optimistic guy. And so I very much welcome this conversation. And let me say, I'm pretty optimistic. I'm pretty bullish on AI. I think that as close a thing as there is in economics to a free lunch. is productivity growth and innovation and technological advances. And that's exactly what AI is. We're going to be able to take existing labor and capital and put it together in ways that are more efficient, that are more productive, that allow more output and us to enjoy higher levels of GDP. So I do think it's a distinct positive. Now, as an economist, now I've got to say, oh, well, there are a few caveats on that. But it seemed like you wanted to ask me a question.
This side or this side.
Exactly. I need
this
both
hand
hands.
Or the other hand.
I wish I had had 3 hands.
I thought you were better than that.
Oh, no. No, the more hands, the better at economics. Yeah.
So let me ask you, we were talking about something Barbara just referred to, which has been intriguing me for years, but we were never quite there. We talked about big data. We talked about buildings talking to cars. We talked about traffic systems. We've talked about conservation and sustainability being something that was achieved. And it really has taken this concept of industrial AI to begin to actuate some of these things. I remember when I was at the Atlantic a dozen years ago, we did a series around the country on smart cities, and I've been waiting for smart cities to evolve. So are we there now? Is this beginning to happen? Because one of the things I'm always interested in as a policy guy is gravity taking us there now? It's not stoppable, or can we screw it up?
So I'm optimistic that the momentum is moving in the right direction. But now the caveat, which I promised, is that with these kinds of transformational events, and we saw with the internet and the computer, and we've seen it with other technologies as they're introduced, it takes a while for them to fully percolate into the economy and get to that point where we're actually producing more GDP. In 1989, Bob Solow, who won the Nobel Prize for Economics, said, well, we see the effects of the IT revolution everywhere except for in GDP and productivity. And so I think it's going to take some time before we reap all these gains. And now there's lots of cool stuff that we're seeing, we're doing, and we've got AI assistants, and we ask ChatGPT questions. But I don't think it's lifting productivity. Where I am seeing it is there's more investment. There's investment in grid, in data centers, in hardware and software. But it's going to take a while before everything comes together and where people at their desks are actually fundamentally doing things differently and producing more outcomes.
Does the investment need to go faster and be bigger?
I think more investment would certainly be helpful. But it's just going to take some time. It's ultimately to get all the way to the end of the row. It's about process innovation. And that's about you and me as we're sitting at our desks and millions of people throughout the economy actually adopting it in ways that allow us to be more productive. And with the computer, with the internet, that took some years. And so I'm optimistic. I said that at the start. Maybe we can get there in 3 to 5 years. That it won't be 10 or 20 years like other technologies. But I think now we're seeing it more on the demand side and the productivity boost where it's driving growth and lower inflation and offsetting tariff shocks and adverse demographics and whatever else. I think that's still some years down the road.
Nathan, Siemens is clearly a global company. I mean, and under Barbara, you've got tens of thousands of workers in the United States, and they are as much if not more, a digital company than they are, a big machinery, company. There's a very different flavor in this. I'm interested in whether or not at this point, when you kind of look around the world, is the United States getting it right in terms of incentives? Are there other nations that are getting the AI picture done better than we are? What's the global scene look like? How would you rank the top 3 countries in the AI field?
So I'm pretty comfortable that the U.S., in terms of our fundamental research and innovation, but also in diffusing those technologies out to various industries, I think we're number 1. And I think it's happening broadly. We've talked a little bit about Siemens and about manufacturing. We're definitely seeing the manufacturing space to some extent in pharmaceuticals, big time in e-commerce, in media, in communications. There are a lot of different industries that are being supported and helped. So I think that the U.S. is number 1. Now, China takes a different model. And we've recently had some important breakthroughs in AI technology from China, which as an economist, I think wherever a good idea comes from, we ought to celebrate it. But we can go more into that if you'd like. We should further push out the envelope of what's possible. And China has had some huge successes, if not in the AI space, in the tech space. Think about what they've done with EVs and BYD over the last decade. So I'd say distinctly China's number 2. And then I think that, number 3 is probably up for grabs.
So when you see something so pervasively getting deployed, I think that's going to happen.
Yeah.
What does an ROI look like for those that are in this investment? I mean, a lot of people in the investment world here. How do you begin invest? I mean, tell me if I'm wrong. Barbara, didn't you put like $23 billion into investment? Is I have that right? So I did my homework. When you look at some of the major investments, the billions of dollars that have gone into, AI models, AI, software capacity, digital capacity, what will return on investment begin to look like?
I don't want to be that specific, and I think it's going to vary. I think it's going to vary a lot across sectors, but I do think that there will be significantly positive ROI, and there will be notable deltas there. How big they'll be, I think, is an open issue. But it will be big enough that when you accumulate them across the economy, think again, the historical analogy, and I've said this implicit, let me be really explicit. The historical analogy I have in mind is the dot-com boost that we saw in the late 90s, where we had rapid real GDP growth, low inflation, we had lots of fiscal revenues. It was a sunny day in America.
Right.
And it's that kind of a story. And was there a lot of positive returns on investment associated with that? But it varied dramatically across sectors. But it will be appreciable, it will be notable, and it will be incorporated into broad economic aggregates, and markets will respond to it.
So, real last, I want to bring Barbara Humpton up in a minute to have a bit of exchange for our little show here. I mean, you were at the Fed. I mean, you're a serious economist, and sometimes economists have calipers and measuring sticks for things, and sometimes they don't.
Right.
Do we have the measuring sticks we have to look at the huge impacts and benefits potentially of AI, or do we need to develop new ways to look at it?
I was struggling with this as I was kind of thinking about these issues in preparation for our discussion this evening. And I think for me, the main yardstick I have is one that is enormously imperfect, and that's productivity, which is basically output per worker.
Right.
You can think about investment metrics, you can think about deployment metrics, but really that's more about the inputs than the outputs. From there, where do I go? I think I'd be listening, and this is something that I say in a lot of spaces. I'd be listening closely to companies' earnings calls. And I think maybe using AI, we need to find ways to better deploy and aggregate the information that is in those earnings calls. As a macroeconomist, I'm used to thinking about kind of skeletal data, but those earnings calls add a lot of flesh. And that would be the other place I'd be listening. And not only, Steve, not only in the tech sector. Yeah, we've got to follow the tech sector, but it is manufacturing, it's pharmaceuticals, it's media and entertainment. Some of these other sectors I mentioned, we've got to pay attention to, where once it moves into those sectors and those ROIs and that profitability is rising, that's when we can say, aha, it's here.
Well, let me invite Barbara Humpton back to the stage. Somebody can take her seat, if you like. CEO of Siemens USA. There's a seat open here. Big round of applause for Barbara. Don't leave yet, Nathan.
Okay.
We're going to do this in a moment. But look, I want to get a little tension going here. So I want to quote something that you wrote, I think, in a Barron's article last year. And you said, but AI technologies look poised to evolve into full-blown substitutes for labor. And if you go and you talk out there to Americans, labor unions, Screen Actor writers, Screen Actor Guild types, whatever, the top, people work on the GM assembly line. The top anxiety they have is, even when times were pretty good, frankly, under the Biden administration, that they had anxiety that they were going to be displaced by AI. Barbara made a very bold statement up
She
here
did,
that said
which
that
I
is not going to
noted.
happen. So I just want to know: are you wrong or are you right?
Right. It always scares me when somebody quotes to me something that I said a year ago. It always makes me nervous. So I think I'm partially right, and I think Barbara's partially right. And the IMF recently did a study, and they looked at a broad range of occupations, and they classified them into those where AI would be synergistic and complementary, which is the Barbara space, and then into those where AI would be a substitute or it would replace those workers, which is more my Barron's 2024 space.
Right.
And then there was a third category where AI is
So you've evolved.
AI was just irrelevant. And I think that the reality is there is a risk of substitution, but there's another category where it's gonna be complementary. And I think the debate is kind of how big are each one of those bins.
So Barbara, do you agree with what Nathan, how he just laid it out? Because I think what's interesting is, I know you believe strongly about how that's going to go, and we don't have a lot of models out there to show people. I mean, we were just talking about Fort Worth. I've been down, honestly, I'm fascinated by AI and data being woven into a workforce that nobody thought we were going to keep in America, which happened to be GE Appliances, happens to be owned by a Chinese company, now Hire, they're down in Lexington, Kentucky. So I've seen it work, what you're saying, and it's opened up more jobs. But I would say a lot of people don't know the model you're talking about yet.
Yeah, let's look at it this way. Today, there are some have I got this right? About 500,000 open manufacturing jobs across the United States. Literally, we can't find enough people to get the jobs done. What kind of work do people want to do? Well, it turns out that if you can bring them into an environment where they get to work in a tech environment, where they get to work with technology that feels a little bit more like playing a video game, they might not think of it as that old dark, dangerous, and dirty manufacturing of years ago. Come to our Fort Worth facility, and just very quickly, I'll tell you, this is a full circle kind of thing. How much electricity does an AI data center require? A lot. How do you move that electricity? With stuff called switchboards and switchgear. Who makes that? Siemens makes that. We needed to build a new factory to meet the demand of hyperscalers. We built a factory in Fort Worth and needed 700 new workers. Where are you going to get those folks? Talk about the perfect bootstrap story. Our leaders down in Texas said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to hire retired high school principals and teachers. We're going to put up a curriculum on site. So literally people come off the sidelines. We've got former pizza delivery drivers, former cashiers coming to work at Siemens. They go through the curriculum. Then they get an opportunity to work on virtual versions of their machines using AI. The whole factory was built with first a digital twin of what we were going to build, so we'd make sure we did it right. We built that factory in 15 months.
Let's stop there for a minute. Do you know what a digital twin is?
I do.
Do you know that they're the digital twin people?
I like
Do you know
that.
Siemens
The world's most comprehensive.
created the digital
I like
twin?
that. My colleague who follows manufacturing has talked to me about digital twins. But can I?
And you know that's a Siemens thing.
Yes.
Did you know that?
I didn't.
Coined the term,
thought
man.
I thought it was. It's a beautiful term. But let me comment on that. When we talk about technology, we are hardwired to think that who wins with technology? People with skills win. Who loses? People without skills lose. But I think, as you're suggesting, AI may fundamentally shift that balance in some dramatic ways. And specifically, some of the economic research is suggesting that who benefits the most from AI? It's people without expertise and people who are less skilled, because AI can create that offset that deficit in their skills and their understanding. And it tends to equalize performance. So to the extent that there are winners and losers here, it may be very different than the way we were programmed to think over the last 30
Couldn't agree with
years,
you more.
which is a very interesting
And back to the
angle
first question you asked Nathan, how will we know?
Yeah.
I think this is going to be the hardest thing to detect because many of us are using AI and don't even know it. Right?
Right.
This is permeating the way we work, and so it's
Well,
we're
that's why
only going to be able to look with a.
I do think we'll have to get into like the different phases and how different generative AI is in this space. But I want to thank Nathan Sheets. I hear your digital twin is walking around looking for you.
I want to meet him.
I think they're in the back next to the whiskey bar. But it's great to see Nathan. He's one of the great economists, and I'm just really, really pleased to see you here today. Thank you so much, Nathan. Thanks for joining us. Global Chief Economist at Citi. Barbara, why don't you join me right here?
Okay.
We're gonna have our own chat here. Look, I want to get back to this notion of the real big at scale AI for real.
Yeah.
And this is beyond the experience of most people. It's when large systems are talking to other large systems. And data is part of that. I'm just interested in your own description of some of the applications and how you bring this to life so that people understand how flying will be different, how driving will be different, how interacting was, and just give us a sense of what you think that world looks like. Because I don't think we're there yet, but we may be on the edge of it.
We're closer than you think. How many of you have ridden in a Waymo? Have you had the guts to get into a car without a driver? I have, and
Yeah.
I love it.
San Francisco?
I fell asleep. I went in
Ghirardelli?
Phoenix. My first ride was in Phoenix.
Okay.
So we have examples all around us and aren't even aware. One of the things I love about what our team has done at the Consumer Electronics Show, at CES these last few years, is we've been bringing our customers to CES so that people see our technology, not through Siemens showing you technology, but innovators showing you that they used our technology to design and build a new plane, a blended wing aircraft that's going to change aviation. Another innovator who said, I can make desert soil arable. Another innovator.
So these are innovator partners.
Innovators who come to us and they say to us, Siemens, I'm trying to solve a problem and I can't crack the code on this. Can you help me? And we sit down with them and we help them build the digital twins, run the physics simulations, help them figure out how to apply these technologies so that they truly are building something that was never possible before.
Is there something missing in the picture? Because part of the reason we're doing this in New York today is around the notion of investment and money. Is there too little going into this right now?
I've learned from my colleague Anthony Casciano that...
Is that Anthony?
That's Anthony
one on the
standing right there.
I met him when he came in. Get this man a chair. No, he was yeah.
Thanks
Okay,
for
good,
standing.
good.
Family hold
All
back.
right.
Family hold
Yeah.
back. Hey, listen, I just want to say that, the things that are obvious to us right now is that, at the top end of the market, we've got lots of efficiency in the capital markets. In the medium and small, it's much less efficient. We've got to find ways to mobilize capital to the small and medium enterprises who are truly the lifeblood of this economy. And I'm going to tell you, I have the privilege right now of serving on the board of the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond. Got to hear from an economist who showed us what happened post-COVID. European governments gave their support to companies to keep people employed. The US government gave financial support to individuals. What did they do? They quit big companies and they started their own businesses. When you look back at these last 5 years, you'll see that our productivity in the US is about double that of the European productivity. So I think we're in that kind of moment where if we can mobilize capital in the small and medium space, we can light this economy on fire. And that is going to be what carries us forward. Now, I've heard on the question of how much productivity do we think we were going to get, I've heard some analysis out of the current White House. Kevin Hassett, current director of the National Economic Council, recently made some comments. He's looking at about 1.5 points on GDP. And I'm saying it's going to be one of many tools that is going to drive economic expansion in the United States. But this is going to be key.
So Steve Ratner says 2.5.
That'd be awesome.
I mean, I don't know if Steve or Kevin. It's just I've never heard Kevin Hassett not be bolder and bigger in numbers than anyone because he's the one predicted down.
Right now, he's in the midst of needing to balance the budget.
He's now going to deliver this, but I do think in this kind of broadside that when you begin looking at systems in the trade, we're going to bring on Stefan Verholst in a minute, who's a genius at this. He's someone again I've had the privilege of knowing for a long time. But there was an inflection point when I got to know this guy. He was at the Markle Foundation. He gave the New America Foundation, which I helped get launched, a lot of money to hire people like this to come in and say, let's teach lawyers how broadband is going to change their world. Let's teach people in finance how broadband and connectivity. There was a time when the world that you're on your phones and net didn't exist. In 1999, 1998, which, were any of you alive then? Some of you were. It was just inconceivable to look at how dramatic broadband, which is now nothing, was going to change our lives and world. So, and it also happens to be the year that the United States government balanced its budget. I worked in the Senate around that time.
Yep.
We balanced our budget. It was, under Clinton, and Pete Domenici, a Republican from New Mexico, was chair of the committee. And people said it was because all the growth and gains, the productivity gains, whatever.
Grow.
And they say, we make it in. So I want to ask you this. Does it feel that big to you?
Yes.
Again.
Yes. Yeah. Now, think about globalization for a lot of reasons. We now have the technologies that can allow an inventor anywhere to capture their designs in a digital twin and then transmit it everywhere. And it can be made locally, right? We now have the ability for manufacturers, let's take an auto manufacturer, to say, look, I don't want to have spare parts sitting in warehouses everywhere. I want to be able to issue spare parts on demand. We have the technology that will allow us to do that. Not only designers, but also then the software-defined architecture, automation architecture that goes into factories so that we now get the automation. The job of people now is one of orchestrating what's getting done there. If you go to Fort Worth, you'll see people in teams.
I'm going to Fort Worth, by the way.
Everybody go to Fort Worth.
Yeah.
You'll see people working in teams, solving problems.
Can I go there and drop your name and they'll let me in? Yeah? Okay.
Try that.
Okay,
Let's see,
great.
and let me know.
Well, let's, Nathan Ashish just said something else very interesting, which is, perhaps, I remember, Stefan will correct me if I'm wrong, and I apologize for being crude, but he was very crude. There was a Nobel laureate named Arno Penzia said the internet, when it comes online, is going to make dumb people dumber and smart people smarter. It will exacerbate the divisions. Nathan just said something very, very different. He says those that are the least prepared as way are those who are going to benefit the most in a generative AI world. And I find that interesting to look at skills and capability and aspirational enhancements that this may come in for people. I know there's industrial AI, but I'm also interested in how it affects people. Does that fit into the Barbara Humpton model when you think about workforce, et cetera?
It does. There are factories all across this country who have the savant. They have that grizzled veteran who can just walk into a factory, and by the way, it smells. He can tell you, that's off on aisle 3.
So is that person out of business with AI now?
That person is retiring anyway. And what we need is to be able to keep running the factories. So now we can capture that know-how, and I can run in, and I'm telling you that operating that factory feels more like playing a video game.
Real quick before Stefan comes up and joins us here in our little show here, globalization. Okay, it sounds like a cool thing, but make it real.
Yeah, do we need to have a supply chain where we make parts and transfer them on the open seas multiple times? And I'm going to say the word emissions, right? Do we have to do that? Or could we actually make closer to the demand? It turns out we're going to have to move some things around the globe. There's no doubt about that. But if we can move the right things around the globe, can we then do the final preparation, the manufacturing, the assembly, et cetera, closer to the point of demand? Can that be a way that we get a more resilient supply chain? Yes. And I also think what that means is that we look forward to a future when there's smaller manufacturing, maybe in urban settings. I'll just share with all of you, Siemens.
Can I just, in a friendly way, push back? I could grow tomatoes and
but why should you?
Cucumber. I would be terrible, and there'd be bugs in them, and I'm just no good at that kind of thing. But I like to go somewhere and buy them if somebody else does them. Are we fooling ourselves, though, to think that globalization or moving these supply chains closer is as easy as people are talking about?
Listen, it's not easy. I don't mean to imply that. And it's also not desirable. By the way, I will tell you, without naming any names, Siemens has worked with one of the most innovative manufacturers the world has seen in some time. And the first step that this innovator took was automation. And I'd say over automation. And that innovator discovered that, no, you need to innovate the things that make sense, automate the things that make sense. And so I think that's the world we're living in. I'm hoping to push the boundaries on a vision that says we
What was the
can
line you
and
said?
should do
It
more.
opens the realm of human possibilities.
Oh,
I like that line you said.
What AI does is it expands what's humanly possible. By the way, today I read something, I don't know if you saw it in the news, Mark Benioff put out a piece. And what Mark says is economic progress isn't defined by what we can do. It's defined by what we don't have to do anymore. Let's give that some thought. And so, yes, I'm not in the camp that says we want to be able to make Nike shoes, sew soles on shoes everywhere. I'm not in that camp. What I am challenging this room to think about is, what could we do closer to the point of demand if we had the technology? The answer is more than you think.
You want to have somebody else in the show?
Am I still invited to
by
stay?
the way, you did not comment, by the way.
You're wearing Siemens Accelerator socks.
A friend of his, Raya, gave these things to me as I walk in. I'm a big believer in happy socks. And I got happy
These are
socks
very
from
happy.
Siemens.
The Siemens
I was wondering if
Accelerator
you actually
platform.
knew what they were. So you are genuine. You are an authentic Siemens person. Let's invite to this table Stefan Verhulst, who is co-founder and chief research and development officer of the Gov Lab. He's research professor at New York University. He's an old friend of mine. We knew each other at the Markle Foundation. And I can't say enough, frankly, from having read so many monographs from you. I want the audience to know truly how distinguished you are, and, aged and wise.
No expectations.
But Stefan, you were really key in this thing of investing in a think tank and saying, hey, we need to go conceptualize for policymakers and for industry associations and people how the broadband and internet connectivity was going to change everything. Do you remember that?
Sure. Yeah. And you took it on and anyway conceptualized it. And I think it's very important to not only speak about technology, but also about what technology can do and what it ultimately will change. And I think that's what the New America Foundation really tried to do, was to be that bridge between what was happening and then ultimately what people could imagine could happen if we actually manage to implement it in the way that is responsible.
So as we discuss AI for real today with Barbara and so many others, is it really real from your perspective?
Yeah, well, the question is, of course, what are we really talking about? Are we talking about technological breakthroughs, or are we talking about something bigger? And from my point of view, we're really talking about something bigger. And I think it's really about rethinking intelligence as we know it. And I think that's really what we should focus on, not just on the technologies such as AI, which is basically...
So take that a step further.
Take it a step further.
Rethinking intelligence as we know it.
It's all about rethinking intelligence, and also how intelligence is actually being retaught and reconceptualized within manufacturing, but also within daily life, and also in an area that I work a lot within science as well. And we see this in three fields. So one is really about the fact that our cognitive abilities have scaled and changed dramatically, right? So it's not about just processing data and processing a lot of information. It's also about changing the way we reason about particular kind of problems, and also as a result, becoming far more creative in actually coming up with unique solutions that we couldn't imagine, because before we actually didn't have the cognitive abilities to actually become creative. And I think creativity ultimately will emerge as a result of new kind of intelligences that we see. Second manifestation that I see is not just about cognitive abilities, but it's also about the cognitive infrastructure that we have. In the past, a lot of the knowledge was basically centralized, was kind of locked up to a large extent. It was not networked. And what we see as a result of both AI and especially now generative AI, we see actually that the cognitive infrastructure is becoming decentralized and is also becoming networked, which means that you actually can start seeing correlations that you didn't see before. And that's also creating a new kind of intelligence that actually leads to breakthroughs, leads to innovation, because innovation to a large extent is about connecting kind of insights that we had but never connected before. And now we can actually do that to a large extent as a result of AI.
We do have someone else going to come up in a few minutes, but I do want to tell our mic people to get ready, because I do want to tell, I told people we'd take some questions. I want to get questions for both of you. But do you remember the Bill Joy article in early 2001 in Wired magazine? And do you remember the title of it?
Privacy is dead?
No. No. It was Bill Joy, for those of you who don't know, was the chief technology officer at Sun Microsystems, and he wrote a very provocative article. I knew Bill back then. It was Why the Future Doesn't Need Us.
Oh, right, yes.
And it was really about advances in technology, in nanotechnology, and biotechnology, and computing power, all of which have largely come true.
Yeah.
He said there will be either a mass casualty incident or some incident, or nefarious people, or something that will come to undo mankind. And I think when you look back at it, I think Bill was right on some things and wrong on a lot. But it raises the question, which Barbara has made a ferocious defense of: there is a place for people in the future of this.
Yeah.
But a lot of people are worried about being displaced or not having a future where we're not needed. Right. How do you come out? Because you're looking at governance, you're looking at the railings in this new world that come up. How do we get it right, and how could we screw it up?
Yeah, well, meaning I do think that I think the threat, right, is a little bit oversold as well, and I think it's just going to be a transition on how do we actually.
It's sold magazines, though.
It's all absolutely. Yeah. It always sells more magazines. And I always said I would get more funding if I would be more negative as well. But but I think there are. Of course, areas that we really have to start thinking about. How do we prepare people for actually a new era of a new kind of intelligence? And I think that's where we really gonna have to start thinking more about how do we actually go from insight to decisions and to actions. And that's the skill set that we still will need. I mean, we can automate decision making to a certain extent, as was mentioned. Certain things can be automated, certain things cannot be automated. And I think the fact that ultimately people will still have to process the insight that is being presented to them, and then go and actually take decisions and actions. And I think that skill is going to become more important. And by the way, the skill that is going to be really important, which I think AI is changing somewhat as well, is being able to determine what is the question that actually matters for the action and the decision that I seek to take. Because it's going to be, the insight is going to be depending on the question. And that's what I've been talking about, is that everyone is talking about data literacy. What we actually really need is questions literacy. We need to have people understanding, for that situation, this is actually the question that if answered, I will be able to deal with that situation. And it's whether it's at the manufacturing floor, or whether it's within policy context, or within kind of the financial environment as well.
So Barbara, let me ask you a tough question. What's this guy's name again?
Anthony Casciano.
Anthony Casciano. I want to get to know Anthony really well. And I want to tell our mic team, go way, way back to Scott Malcolm, sit in the back. Scott, raise your hand, because he's always got a good question. He's a very famous former New York Times guy. But Barbara, I want to ask you, Roland Bush has been part of the, you're a global CEO, you're the American CEO. We have Anthony here. I'm interested in transformation inside big companies like yours, literacy among companies, people like yours. I mean, I know that everybody needs to pretend to be a believer, because Roland Bush is a big believer in this, and I know you are. But how hard is it to bring along a complex system to have I mean, what I just listened to Stefan about this notion of being a super intelligence system, not something I hear every day. So how do you develop a kind of get your colleagues all coming along to get the picture?
Our goal has been to get people completely immersed. We're spending something like $37 million a year on training for our team. Actually, the training platform we use is AI driven itself. And so we have basically a design your own adventure kind of online training program. But that online training or classroom training can only account for about 10% of ultimately the transformation that you need. So much has to happen on the job. So my favorite thing to do in any meeting I'm in, if we end 5 minutes early, is to say, hey, how are you applying AI in the work that you're doing? And for instance, I was in a quarterly balance sheet review, right? And I asked the team this question, thinking I'd stumped them. I thought I was a step ahead of them, and they said, "Oh, as a matter of fact, we used AI to basically gen the balance sheet, and then we compared it to what we would have expected." So, right, everybody is beginning to experiment and get comfortable with it. I think what Roland has just heard, and hey, for all the Siemens people out there, I just put you on alert that Roland met with a bunch of our peer tech executives out in Silicon Valley in January, February. And he said they're doing things like declaring, "I'm going to cut the corporate expenses by 40%, get everything done. Here's your AI agents," right? So we know that the big step is.
That's Roland who said that?
Roland said his peers are doing that, and he asked me his opinion about whether we should do that. Yeah,
they're going Doge. Doge is the new thing.
I said, "Hey, how about if we switch this around? How about if we said,
groans.
How about if we said every dollar that you save, you can actually put toward." Don't you think that's a much more attractive value proposition?
I'd really love to get a couple of questions here from the audience for both of you while I have you over here. How about, Scott, do you have a question?
Scott, hold up.
We've got a recording here, so. And this is Scott Malcolmson, who's written about these issues, former New York Times Magazine writer. He's very tall, and I'm thrilled to see him here today.
Nice to see you all. Barbara, your vision suggests that AI could be a tool for deglobalization. And do you think it would appeal to states as a way to basically deglobalize politically?
I mean, well, here's the question. Why don't we want to build up economies everywhere? I think we should. And I think AI can help. I think that one of the main exports we should have out of the United States is the kind of industrial technology that would make it possible for others to build as well. And we're going to find that global creativity then takes off. Have you noticed that people who make also innovate? I actually think that being able to manufacture is one of those killer apps in the creative equation. And I mean, just watch the history of what's happened in China, and you can see this evolution from maker to
making matters.
Creator.
Yeah.
Making matters.
Stefan, what do you think about the deglobalization? I also want to think, you've written a lot recently about war and peace and technology, which I found really interesting. I just want to throw it into the mix here for a minute, because I used to be very involved with weapons laboratories in New Mexico, Sandia and Los Alamos. And there was a point where their funding was going down because wars were going down. It was a time that happened. And so they began thinking, how can we use technology that we have in our labs for trust building?
Right.
How can we use it for peace as opposed to thinking about our war-fighting mission? Now, that went away with the Gulf War, and things. But I'm just interested in a return. So your thoughts on that real quick.
Yeah, and so perhaps you referred to the fact that recently I've been advocating for going beyond dual use, which is typically how people start thinking about technology. Dual use technology that can be used for civic purposes can also be used for defense purposes and vice versa. And so what I've been arguing for is that we should actually start thinking about triple use, which is technology that can be used for defense, can be used for civic, but why don't we also use it for actually advancing peace? Because that turns out to be the real objective from my perspective. And indeed, we do need defense, and we do need defense technology.
Right.
But if you are, for instance, a venture capital and says we're going to invest in dual use, why don't you do a percentage also then on peace tech, for instance? And I think that's where we can actually then build a market for peace technology, which is currently totally underfunded. I mean, if you look at technology that, for instance, can prevent peace or can be used to deal with some of the negative consequences of conflict, that technology is totally underfunded, and I think we could actually use it if we start adopting a triple use kind of perspective.
Cool. So what's your name again?
Hi, so I'm Evan Rojas.
Evan, I kicked him out of line over here. He was in line for the VRs, which you should all go see, but I wanted to experience it, and so he said I'm a moderator, so I came up.
This
so
is my revenge.
Did you get up there yet? Did you get to
No, I have not, but I will be up there.
Give him priority, Evan the priority, but I want to give you a chance for a question.
Thank you. So you were mentioning about using AI for peace, and I was thinking about, since the war in Ukraine, there's been a lot of use of drones, right? Like smaller quadricopter drones to fight against more old school industrial warfare type weapons. And how do you see that application growing? And then, comparing that to, let's say, the drone swarms that we've seen that China has used for, firework displays. But in terms of, a warfare type application and then a peaceful alternative.
Yeah. So every year we do a Peace Tech prize where we actually call for applications and then we give a prize to the ones that actually advance technology in ways that can provide for peace or can deal with some of the consequences of conflict. And so the winner of last year was a drone company that basically used drones for demining. Turns out that most of the mines that are being placed during conflict never get demined, mainly because it's very laborious, very dangerous, but you could actually use drones to fly over it, have some kind of a sensors and an activation system in order to demine most of the mines that we still have in the world. And that's kind of the technology that we are talking about. Drones can be used for attack, can be used for military purposes, can be used for civic purposes, but can also be used for peace purposes. And turns out the company that we gave the prize to, very hard to get funding. And so that's what we basically advocating for. Why don't we have triple use, right? Each time when you invest in defense, have a percentage go to actually advancing peace tech, for instance, that can deal with some of the consequences of conflict as well.
Well, I want to thank Stefan Verhulst for joining our show. Are you going to stick around for a while?
Yeah, I will.
He'll be out
See you
near
in
the whiskey bar. But I tell you, he's very worth chatting with and knowing because his ability to visualize what's coming is really unmatched. I'm now going to invite to our show. Are you going to stay with us for a little bit?
Can I?
Yeah, I want you to stay up here. It turns out you're pretty good at this. But I want to invite Navroop Sadev. Navroop, please join us up here. Great to see you. Welcome to
Good to see
the
you
Steve
too,
Clements
Steve.
Show here.
Great conversation,
AI
Barbara.
for Real.
Yeah. Thank you.
Navroop is the CEO of the Digital Economist, and she's been out there looking at the nexus of technology and the future of workforce and how these various pieces come together. You've heard our discussions thus far, and I'm just going to put it to you. If you were like having to be asked, or we could ask you, or we could ask like generative AI. To compete with one another, like Paul Bunyan and the saw or whatever. What were our blind spots so far?
Yeah, kill question right there, Steve. Thank you for that. I would say the generative AI is going to be very optimistic about AI without sort of realizing the human cost of some of those things. And you probably know this. The work that I do is how does technology, how does economics, how does money, all of which are human inventions, serve life-centered systems, serve humanity, serve other forms of life, right? And so for me, I think we're not realizing how polarizing a lot of the tech has turned out to be. It wasn't supposed to be like that, right? It was supposed to democratize, institutions across the world, but that's basically not really how it played out. And I think a lot of that also resonates with the New America mission as well, right? Second thing, I would say, in terms of the pitfalls, the concentration, right, of power and wealth. I want to bring back the term political economy, because that's really what we're looking at. Before economics became its own domain, and then finance, sort of its daughter, subject, became its own thing. And now technology and financialization are two things that drive globalization around the world. You pull these two levers, and markets can crash. I mean, anything can happen, right? We're seeing that with tariffs, and we're seeing that with sort of, the political movements. A lot of the wars are resource wars, right? So, I share Barbara's enthusiasm. We use AI maximum possible we can in every way we can. So definitely want to follow up on that. But at the same time, I think, except for this bubble, if you may, in New York and, where we are here at the 60th floor, there's a lot of people who are really far behind, and I would say I disagree with the fact that the benefits of Gen AI are going to be available more to people who are not quite literate in AI. I think people don't realize the extent of data large corporations have, right? I mean, Barbara would appreciate that. The extent of insights, extent of intelligence large companies, organizations, institutions, governments have access to, like the little guy who's generating an image saying, oh, how do I look like in a Indian kurta? I don't know. You know what I mean? It's nowhere near that. And I think as somebody who studies this, as somebody who drives a think tank with 100 people who study this across domains, we're really acutely aware of it. So it's a mixed feeling, Steve.
Well, let me ask you.
Can
Go
I
ahead,
interrupt?
Barbara. Please go.
Because this is where I'm so glad we're talking about this, because this is where I think if we can focus on AI for real, right? Not the large language models using the large swaths of data everywhere,
Right.
but are focusing the technology on solving problems that need to be solved, like the art of manufacturing, et cetera. I'm fascinated by the idea that we have to be aware of what we're doing, the consequences of what we're doing. We've got to think things through. I mean, from the time a person picked up a rock and used it as a tool, it could also be used as a weapon.
Well, what you're saying, and I'm hearing from both of you, is a kind of deliberateness of purpose. And I think a lot of the,
100%,
the discussion
Yeah.
of AI often is very amorphous, very big, so big it's used as in shorthand for meaning lots of different things. And a lot of people say, hey, we've had it for a long time. There's a very new power to AI, and I keep saying maybe we need to figure out what problems we're trying to solve in society,
yeah.
or
You can't be hammer
solve in
looking for a nail.
business. And then begin rolling in that direction. But let me ask you a question. I'm anybody a surfer in here? Anybody a real
I
surfer?
tried.
Anybody
Who else
a
has
surfer?
tried? Anybody
Oh,
tried?
wait, your hand went up. You were shy. Who is a surfer and is shy? I have always,
She's a big
I'm a
surfer.
wannabe surfer. My emoji I always put on everything is the surfer emoji. But I'm not, I look at us as a metaphorical surfer because I've never quite gotten up on the board. But I want to, if anybody wants to talk to me about it later. But the reason I mention it is I sort of look at AI as being a giant wave. Like, it's coming. The waves are very big of what's coming. And so, and I've always sort of thought to myself, how do we help people or businesses or, the different components surf a bigger wave, a bigger, cooler wave, right? And that's what I, come to you when I think about the workforce and I think what happened. One thing is to worry and resent change.
Right,
the other
right.
thing
That
is
is to drive
to
it.
know the wave is coming. There's nothing you can really do about it. So what do you do? So
Yeah.
I'm just interested in those pieces.
Great question. So we have AI, which is 70 years old, 80 years old, effectively, right? Barbara, to your point, everybody's been using AI. If you have an iPhone or you have any smartphone, really, you are using AI. If you're on the internet, you're using AI. I think what is transformative that happened over the past 2 years is that the use of AI, generative AI, is no longer restricted to large corporations or institutions. It is in the hands of the end user. So now the world's waking up like, whoa, this is real. That's why we're here. What is, AI for real, right? And so this awareness is a shift in consciousness towards Stefan was earlier. I'm kind of a little spiritual and philosophical about it, right? Yeah. Because you have to think things through from first principles, right? Like, what do you stand for, right? And the way to address what you just said, Steve, is to give power of data in people's own hands. It's a governance issue. It's not a technology issue. It's not an economics issue. And there's a number of parameters we use to actually study concentration of power, study concentration of capital, we study concentration of productivity. GDP, Gini coefficient, is used to measure, right, the economic inequality, for example. And then we have a number of metrics that we're looking at. I'm kind of going into the downside, if you may, of what too much concentration of resources does is in the developed world, U.S. is far behind on every metric, right? From healthcare perspective, from mortality rate, maternal mortality, infant mortality, on and on and on. So the question is, what are we ultimately serving? Are we serving humans or are we serving technology, which is just a tool?
But let me just push that on that for a moment. The one area that if you poll Americans, and I think Eric Schmidt told me this 10 years ago, I was thinking, Eric Schmidt, former CEO of Google, I asked him, what would make Americans fall in love with AI? He says two things right up the front. One, better health diagnostics, that our health diagnostics are so crappy in this country, the error rate so over the top. And the other is, individual, personal fraud, detection of fraud and whatnot. And it turns out the Telescope Foundation really, did this Gallup poll recently where they said those are the two biggest things that people see. So when you look at maternal mortality, when you look at healthcare, you look at a lot of those issues. To me, it's the immediate application of where we should have that. So am I wrong?
No, I think you're absolutely right. It's so up close. We all need that, right? And I mean, it's again in the news, and now we're in such a politically, dangerous time too, where our institutions around, I don't get any Medicare or Medicaid. I'm an Indian citizen still, but I'm defending it, right? So I think these have to exist, right, to take care of our citizens. And we're putting a lot of pressure on these because we are almost over financializing certain technologies.
Right.
I think there should be more funding in AI, but I think it should be distributed. Right.
Barbara, what about Dotmatics?
Oh, it's so interesting that you raise this as Siemens recently announced that we'll be buying Dotmatics, a software company here in the United States, AI, that gets used in the drug discovery in the early phases. And again, this is where AI helps us address the most complex problems. Right? Things we could never do before we can now do. The goal, I do hear a lot of people asking this question of where do corporations fit in all of this? And what I will tell you is I am working to make Siemens one of those corporations that actually helps everyone else succeed in their mission. Right? There are certain companies that have access to technologies and to markets, and that if we can choose very carefully the things we focus our talents and our resources on, we can actually drive change because we work at scale. So all innovation happens with two people over a napkin. But you got to get through the valley of death, and then you've got to get up the Everest of scale. And this is where I think companies can actually, but we've got to know what we're trying to accomplish.
Just as we wrap this up and want to go to the whiskey bar, which I really am excited about that Japanese whiskey over there, and all of this, and I want to meet many of you. And I should also mention that with Siemens, we're going to take this show on the road. I think we're doing, we're doing Dallas, and we're doing San Francisco. Anybody from San Francisco? It's going to be even cooler. No, I'm just joking. This is the coolest
and
it could be.
DC for the policymakers.
But I do want to ask you about the investment community, and you deal with economists, and that's part of the financial community as you sort of look at this project. Barbara, from the partnerships that out there we were just talking about, was saying, I'd like to kind of know how they can be engaged. How they can engage this field in a way that constructively enhances this going in a good direction, right? I think technology, in my view, is always neutral, and it needs to be driven in a good direction that solves problems. Yeah. But I'm interested in your thoughts. Right. As part of our reason for talking this is that many of you are in the financial sector. So what's the social contract there with the financial sector that we ought to be looking for?
Beautiful question. I want to write a book on the social contract, Steve, reimagining it. But that said, I think I see a lot of the sort of the herd behavior in the investor community as well. So the same CEO and everybody's chasing it, and ChatGPT is raising so much capital. But there's a lot of other sort of, to your point earlier, problems we should be solving. For me, the big things are decentralization, access control on data by individuals, those who actually are generating it, right? And I absolutely agree with Barbara. Our business should be in business to solve real problems. Otherwise, I don't know. And it's a bold statement, but I think a lot of the times, Steve, you remember this from the Chicago school, right? Business is an ethics-free zone. I've got so much problem with that statement. I mean, seriously? Really? Business is an ethics-free zone?
I'll build on this because I read Anti-Fragile. Has anybody read the book?
Nassim Taleb, yeah.
Right.
All-time favorite.
Well, and corporations are considered fragilistas. All right, what's anti-fragile? Things that get stronger with disruption. It's the opposite of fragility. So how do we become stronger through disruption? That's what we've got to focus on. And so our company actually built our business strategy around 5 global megatrends: the changing environment, urbanization, the aging demographics of people around the world, globalization, now glocalization, and the digitalization of everything. 5 megatrends. Look to the year 2050 and ask, what is the world going to look like? It turns out if you tie your business strategy to, basically the world-changing forces, your business will grow with the planet.
Well, look, what an incredible conversation, which I would like to keep going and going and going. But I know a lot of people, we promised reception. You're all staying. Barbara, I would encourage people to come talk to Barbara and her team.
I'm easy to find.
And Navroop Sadev, CEO of The Digital Economist. Navroop, I love your work, and I just want to say thank you. I also just want to say for a moment, when we do these kinds of things and bring in people together, I do think it's really important to talk about the soul and the conscience that's sort of also part of this picture and getting this right. You know, I read a book, Tools and Weapons. It was actually by Brad Smith of Microsoft. It actually said any technology can be used for good or will. You can use facial recognition software for social capital programs in China, or you can use it for all sorts of other things there. And I do think there's a responsibility. And I just want to thank Siemens and Barbara Humpton and her team for letting us go into some spaces here and to kind of think about what this world could look like. And, you know, there's some risks in it. And I just want to say thank you so much.
Can I just say one more
Yeah.
thing? I've been sitting here imagining you all 25 years from now,
Ooh.
talking to an audience much like this and saying, yes, I was present the night I learned about
AI for real.
AI for real. And look at us now. Look at how the world has changed. You're part of it. Can't wait to see you there.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. Do you have final thoughts, final words? Great. Well, look, we've got VR over here. Taylor Gerke on our team basically put together this fabulous whiskey bar. I've never seen anything like that before. I hope to meet as many of you as I can. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you all for coming, and we're going to have a reception for the next hour or so. Thank you.
Good job.